A high-flying CEO made a cruel bet with the cleaner in front of his entire party. She could have just ignored him, but she chose to do something no one expected. "Hey, are you spying on me?" Roderick pointed a finger directly at Fernanda. She was holding a tray of champagne flutes, her gaze fixed on the violin hanging on the far wall. An antique instrument of dark wood, framed and displayed like a museum sculpture. "Never seen a Stradivarius," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. The closest guests were already chuckling before he finished the sentence. Fernanda didn't avert her eyes. "It's beautiful," she said, almost to herself. Roderick looked her up and down. White linen jacket, expensive whiskey in hand, surrounded by people who hung on his next joke as if it were paid entertainment. He loved an audience. "You know what I find funny?" he said, his smile widening. A cleaner staring at a $2 million violin like she knows what she's looking at. More laughter, louder this time. "If you play that violin, I'll marry you," he announced to the whole room. "But we both know that's not going to happen, don't we? Mop hands aren't for a Stradivarius." The roar of laughter was universal. A man in a grey suit clapped as if he were watching a stand-up comedy special. A woman in a gold dress covered her laugh with her hand, but didn't bother to hide it much. People were taking photos. Over 30 pairs of eyes watched Fernanda, expecting her to drop her head, apologize, and disappear down the service corridor. She didn't. She stood her ground, took a deep breath, and looked straight at him. "Could you pass me the violin?" Then, the room froze in a way that seemed rehearsed. Roderick stopped smiling. He stared at her for 2-3 seconds, like someone who couldn't believe a fly had just talked back. Then he walked to the wall, ripped the violin from its support, and shoved it into her hands with unnecessary force. "All right, play, but when you mess up, you grab your coat and leave." Fired, in front of everyone. Fernanda's face went white. Her fingers closed around the instrument mechanically, almost involuntarily. The weight of the violin was familiar in a way that hurt. What was a woman who hadn't touched a violin in 15 years about to do? The weight of the violin was familiar in a way that hurt. She'd known that weight since she was 6. "That's it, Fernanda. Elbow up. Good. Now feel it." Old man Lauro held the bow with her, hand over hand, in the little back room of the local public school where he taught. It smelled of wood, rosin, and the school office's old percolator coffee. He didn't have money for a private music school, but he had infinite patience and an ear that tolerated no false notes. "You've got something special. Girl, I can't explain it. It's like the violin already knows it's yours." She was 8 when he said that. It stuck with her forever. At 12, she played in a state competition and won. They were invited for a performance in Sydney, at a proper theatre, with red velvet seats and crystal chandeliers. Old man Lauro was in the front row, wearing the suit he only used for weddings and funerals. When she finished, he gave a standing ovation before anyone else, his eyes filled with tears, and a smile she never saw, matched on anyone else's face. "Today was the happiest day of my life," he said on the way home. 2 months later, he had a heart attack while teaching. He didn't make it. Fernanda was 12. Her mum was overseas, trying to make a life, and the money ran out before the end of the next month. Music school was the first thing to be cut. Then came the dreams she hadn't even named yet. She moved in with her aunt, stopped studying music, and wrapped her father's violin in an old cloth inside a box that went to the back of the wardrobe. She didn't forget, she just learned not to remember. She found a job at 15, cleaned schools, cleaned hospitals, cleaned rich family homes. She grew up, she got by, and the violin stayed in the back of the wardrobe inside the box with the old cloth. The laughter of a woman in the room brought Fernanda back. She blinked. The mansion's chandelier was lit above her head. The smell was expensive perfume, not rosin, and instead of her father's worn suit, there was a man in white linen waiting for her to fail. Roderick crossed his arms. "Are you just going to stand there looking at me, or are you going to play?" Fernanda looked at the violin in her hands, calloused fingers, mop hands, as he'd said, but fingers that once knew exactly where to land on each string, without even thinking. 15 years. Was it still there? Fernanda slowly raised the violin, not playing yet, just positioning it. Chin on the chin rest, elbow at the right angle, everything returning like muscle memory, not conscious thought. Her body remembered before her head did. She closed her eyes for a second. "Oi, mind if you don't?" The voice came from the side. It was a grey-haired man in a dark suit, looking at her with that expression of someone who just saw a dog try to open a door. The badge on his pocket read, "Conductor Arnaldo, live music." "This instrument isn't a toy for an event," he said in a tone that explained basic arithmetic to a child. "Give it here." Fernanda didn't move. I just want a few minutes. Minutes for what? He crossed his arms. Do you work here or are you here to perform? From the other side of the room, Roderick watched, glass in hand, with the smile of someone who'd bought a ticket to this spectacle. A waiter rushed past and bumped Fernanda's arm. She almost dropped the violin. She held on tight, but the tray still in her other hand fell to the floor, glasses shattering on the marble. The sound cut through the room. Everyone looked. Fernanda bent down to pick up the shards. No one came to help. A guest swerved around her as if she were a pavement obstacle. The waiter mumbled an apology, but his eyes were already looking away, concerned about something else. She picked up the pieces of glass with one hand, the violin still clutched in the other, kneeling on the polished marble floor of a mansion that wasn't hers, while the distant laughter continued. No one saw her. She was invisible there, just as she had been invisible in every house she'd cleaned for the past 15 years. She stood up, took a breath, walked to the corner of the room where conductor Arnaldo was arranging a music stand, and asked again, this time more softly, "Please, just one song." Arnaldo didn't even lift his eyes from the sheet music. "Talk to the owner of the house." Roderick was surrounded by people when Fernanda approached. The group closed ranks like a wall before she even opened her mouth. "Her again," said Patricia, the woman in the gold dress, with a smile that wasn't a smile. "Roderick, you've created a monster." "She's not a monster," he replied, looking down at Fernanda. "Just persistent, like a cockroach." General laughter. Fernanda ignored it. "You made a bet." "I made a challenge," he corrected, raising a finger. "Important difference. A challenge implies the other person has a chance to succeed. Do you have a chance? Let me try, and you'll find out." "Oh, how cheeky," Patricia said, turning to the group. "Everyone, the cleaner wants to perform at Roderick's gala event. Did anyone buy a ticket?" More laughter. A bald man in the background clapped again. Fernanda recognized him as the same one who'd applauded before. Roderick took a step towards her. Not much, just enough to mark his territory. "Do you know how much this instrument is worth?" he asked. 2.3 million. I bought it at auction in Vienna. Have you ever been to Vienna? No. Have you ever been to Sydney? Fernanda didn't answer. Have you ever left your hometown for anything other than cleaning up other people's messes? His voice had lost its playful tone. It became colder. Because this violin has been played by musicians who studied their whole lives. Professors, conductors, people who dedicated decades to earning the right to touch it. And you think 15 minutes of persistence gives you the same right? Fernanda looked at him. "I didn't ask for a right. I asked for a chance. I won't let a cleaner's hands ruin a Stradivarius," he said very slowly, very clearly, for everyone to hear. "Go back to your post before I need to call someone to escort you out of here." She stood still for 3 seconds. Then she turned her back and walked away. Defeat tasted like metal in her mouth. The service corridor was narrow, lit by a cold, flickering lamp. Fernanda leaned against the wall, still holding the violin she'd forgotten to return, and stared at the floor. She could simply leave the instrument there, grab her coat from the staff room, and go home. No one would miss her. They probably wouldn't even notice she'd left. It's what she always did, disappear quietly, leave everything tidy, and go. But something held her feet. She slowly ran her thumb over the violin's wood. The varnish was cold, and the thought she didn't want to have came to her. What if I can't anymore? 15 years without playing. Her hands had changed, become harder, thicker, hands that scrubbed floors, carried buckets, wrung out wet cloths. They weren't the delicate hands of a 1-2-year-old girl on a Sydney stage. Maybe Roderick was right, not in the cruel way he said it, but deep down, maybe he was right. Maybe the gift had gone with her father. She sat with that thought for a while, let it settle, press, hurt the way it wanted to hurt. Then she remembered something old man Loro always said when she struggled with a difficult passage and wanted to quit. He didn't yell, didn't complain, he just took the bow, adjusted her position, and whispered, "The violin doesn't forget who loved it. You just need to remember first." Fernanda closed her eyes, placed the violin on her shoulder right there in the cold corridor. No audience, no good lighting, no one watching. She positioned her fingers on the string. The bow hovered over the strings for a second, and she played a single note, just one imperfect, a little shaky, with 15 years of silence weighing on it. But it was a real note, produced by fingers that still knew where to land. The corridor echoed the sound. She opened her eyes. It wasn't about proving anything to Roderick. It never was. It was about that front row, that worn suit, that smile she never saw again. She wasn't leaving. Fernanda returned to the main hall with the violin. She didn't run, didn't shout, didn't demand attention. She just entered through the side door, walked to the center of the space, and stopped. She stood there until the first few people noticed. Then others. Then Roderick. He was in the middle of a conversation when he noticed, looked at her, looked at the violin, and gave that smile of someone who just received an unexpected gift. "Look at that," he announced to the room. "The cleaner's back." The background music stopped. Conductor Arnaldo lowered his baton, not quite understanding what was happening. Around 40 pairs of eyes turned to Fernanda. She didn't falter. "I came to play." Roderick tilted his head. "You left. You came back. And you still have the nerve to show up here in front of my guests with my violin in your hand. You made a bet." I accepted. "A bet?" he repeated as if the word were amusing. "My dear, that wasn't a bet. It was a joke. Do you understand the difference?" Patricia let out a short snort of laughter. "A joke is funny for everyone," Fernanda replied. "You were the only one laughing." The room fell silent for a second. Roderick took a step towards her, smiling, but with cold eyes. "You're here contracted to work, not to give your opinion on my sense of humor. Put the violin back on the stand and go do whatever you were supposed to be doing. After I play." He spread his arms to the room as if asking for witnesses. "Folks, look at this situation. Does anyone here think I should let the cleaning lady play a $2 million Stradivarius in the middle of my event?" No one said anything, but their faces said it all. "Look at these hands," Roderick said, suddenly grabbing Fernanda's wrist. She resisted, but he lifted her hand high for the guests to see. "Look, calloused, bruised, hands that carry buckets. Does anyone think these hands have a place on an instrument like this?" Fernanda pulled her arm back. The audience murmured. It wasn't a murmur of indignation. It was of discomfort mixed with entertainment, the kind of thing people find wrong but keep watching. It was Patricia who fanned the flames. "Roderick, actually, I think you should let her try," she said with her sweetest tone. "Seriously, let the girl play. When she messes up in front of everyone, at least we'll know we gave her a chance." An older man in a burgundy tie said to his neighbor in a voice not as low as he thought, "I bet she doesn't even know how to hold the bow." His neighbor chuckled. Someone took out their phone and started filming discreetly at first, then not so discreetly. Roderick broke into a wide smile. He was enjoying this, very much. "All right," he said, extending the bow to her. "You want it so badly? Play. But when you stop in the middle, when you mess up, when nothing comes out, you take that bow, put it on the stand, grab your coat, and disappear. And don't ever come back to work here. We call it termination for cause incompetence proven live." He paused. In front of witnesses, the woman in the gold dress clapped twice, laughing. Fernanda took the bow. 3 phones were filming now. A young man, in his early 20s, stood up from the sofa for a better angle. They treated it like a show, as if she were a comical attraction for the night, not a person. She positioned the bow, took a breath, and spoke before playing, looking directly at Roderick. "My father was a musician, a violin teacher for 30 years. He taught poor kids who could never afford music school. He never charged any of them. He used to say that music wasn't for the rich, it was for those who loved it. You bought a Stradivarius for $2 million. My father never had money to buy even the cheapest violin at the market. But he knew that an instrument is just wood and strings. What makes the music is who plays." The room fell quiet in a different way. A white-haired lady in the corner had stopped looking at her phone. Conductor Arnaldo in the back was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. For 30 seconds, it seemed like the speech had worked. It seemed like something in the air had changed. Then Roderick slowly clapped. 1 clap, 2, 3, the kind of applause that isn't praise. "How lovely," he said. "Seriously? What a beautiful story. My heart's right here." He pointed to his chest with 2 fingers, as fake as a counterfeit $50 note. "But a story about a dead father doesn't play the violin. Fingers play the violin, and yours don't. So, either you start now, or we end this little soap opera and get back to the event." Patricia laughed loudly this time, without even trying to hide it. The young man with the phone moved closer. Fernanda raised the bow. The first note came out tremulous. It wasn't a mistake. It was tension. It was 15 years. It was 40 pairs of eyes waiting for her to fall. But Roderick didn't wait even 2 seconds. "Hear that?" He turned to the room. "Hear that sound? A $2 million violin being destroyed in real time. Laughter. Loud, collective, unceremonious. Stop," he said, taking a step forward. "Enough. Stop before you ruin it more. I haven't finished. You have finished." He took the violin from her hands with a certainty that made it clear it wasn't a request. "Mop hands aren't for a Stradivarius. I said it before. I'm repeating it now. This isn't the place for you." He turned his back on her, and handed the violin to conductor Arnaldo, as if the matter were closed. The audience dispersed, conversations resumed, background music returned. In less than 2 minutes, it was as if she hadn't even entered the room. Fernanda stood in the middle of the space for a moment. No violin in her hands, no ally nearby, no one looking, because no one found it interesting to look anymore. Alone in the middle of a crowded party, and it was that silence that hurt more than anything he had said. The service bathroom was at the end of the corridor, behind the kitchen, away from the party noise. Fernanda entered, closed the door, turned the lock, and stood in front of the mirror for a while, without truly looking at herself. She looked at the sink, the tiles, the cheap soap, the cleaning company left in the staff bathrooms, the same soap she used in every house she cleaned. She knew the scent by heart. She turned on the tap, slowly washed her hands, as if washing something other than dirt. Mop hands. She turned her palms up and looked. Roderick hadn't invented anything. The marks were there, the thick skin at the base of her fingers, the callus on her right index finger, the small scar on her left wrist from when she'd slipped with a piece of glass in a kitchen years ago. Hands that told a story she had never chosen to tell. She picked up the coat folded on top of the toilet, put it on her arm, and stood like that. Coat on arm, bag on shoulder, ready to leave. But her feet wouldn't move. She stared at the closed door for a full minute. On the other side, the party continued. She could hear the distant murmur, the clinking of glasses, a laugh that could be anyone's. Roderick's life continuing perfectly well, without any consequences. And then her hand moved without her telling it to, going to the inner pocket of her bag, a pocket she almost never opened, and pulled out a small photo, folded in half, the crease already worn from so much opening and closing over the years. She didn't carry much, but that photo had been with her since she was 12. Old man Lauro, on the day of the recital in Sydney, his wedding and funeral suit, front row, smiling in a way she never saw again in anyone. She looked at the photo for a while. It wasn't a dramatic turnaround. There was no swelling music in the background, no tears streaming down her face. There was just that quiet, heavy sensation of someone who realizes that if she leaves now, she'll carry this for the rest of her life. Not Roderick's humiliation, not Patricia's laughter, but the first tremulous note she had pulled from the violin there in the hall, because she had heard it. In the midst of everything, in the midst of the tension and the fear and the filming phones, she had heard it. The note was there, imperfect, yes, embarrassed, yes, but it was there. The sound had come out, the violin had responded. The violin doesn't forget who loved it. She folded the photo back up, put it in her pocket, and hung her coat on the hook behind the door. She wasn't leaving. She went back through the service corridor, this time slowly, with no fixed destination yet. She passed the kitchen, the staff room, the cleaning supply closet. She knew every meter of that corridor because she was the one who cleaned it. That's when she heard it. It came from a side room, a kind of support room, where the music staff kept cases and equipment. The door was ajar, and from inside came the sound of a violin, someone playing a simple scale, tuning. She stopped, peered through the crack in the door. Conductor Arnaldo was alone, sitting on a plastic chair, the violin on his lap. He wasn't really playing, just adjusting the strings with that concentrated attention of someone who's done it for 50 years. On the bench next to him, an open folder with documents, photos, old sheet music. Fernanda was about to keep walking, but one of the photos in the folder caught her eye in a way that made her stomach churn. It was a black and white photo, worn, a group of musicians in front of a theater, and in the left corner, in a dark suit, smiling at the camera with a violin in hand. She recognized him before she was sure. Recognized him the way you recognize something that stays in your memory before it becomes a mere recollection. It was old man Lauro, younger, but it was him. She pushed the door open. "Excuse me, did you know Lauro Alves?" Arnaldo looked up, stared at her for 2 seconds, his head tilting slightly to one side. "Knew him?" he said slowly. "He was the best teacher I ever saw. Why do you ask?" "Because he was my father." Arnaldo stood still for a moment, the violin still on his lap, his eyes fixed on her, as if trying to find something in Fernanda's face to confirm what she had said. "Lauro's daughter," he repeated softly. It wasn't a question, it was him processing. He slowly rose from the chair, with the careful movement of someone with years on their back, and stood in front of her. He was a tall man, with broad shoulders that time had curved a little. He was around 70, maybe more. Dark eyes, serious, but with something warm inside. "I was your father's student," he said. "Not for long, but long enough." He taught me more in 6 months than I learned in 2 years of conservatory. He paused. How is he? Fernanda didn't need to answer. Her expression answered. Arnaldo closed his eyes for a second. When I was 12, he nodded slowly, his jaw firm. I heard he was sick. I tried to get in touch, but life went on. He opened his eyes and looked at her with direct frankness. Do you play? I used to play. I stopped when he died. Why did you stop? Because there was no way to continue. Arnaldo looked at her, then at the violin in his own hands, then looked back at her. I saw, clearing his throat, what happened out there in the hall. He said, I saw everything. A pause. But I also heard the note you played before he took the violin. Fernanda said nothing. It was just one note, shaky, full of fear. He paused, calculated, and still, it was beautiful. She felt something tighten in her chest. What do you want to do? He asked. I want to play, she replied. The right way, to the end. Arnaldo placed the violin in its case, closed the clasp, and stood up with a determination that seemed 20 years younger than the rest of him. Then we're going to do it, he said. But our way. He walked to the open folder on the bench and began turning pages with the calm urgency of someone who knows exactly what they're looking for. He pulled out an old, faded envelope with yellowed edges. I've kept this for years, he said, opening the envelope carefully. Never quite knew why. Maybe this was it. He took out a newspaper article, cultural page, black and white photograph, headline at the top. Fernanda took it and read, 1-2, year, old prodigy represents state in national classical music competition. Fernanda Alves surprises jury with unusual interpretation for her age. The photo was of her, when she was 12, on stage in a white dress, violin on her chin, eyes closed. She couldn't speak for a moment. Your father sent me this article by letter, Arnaldo said. He wrote underneath, this is my greatest work. He let the phrase settle. There was more in that envelope. He took out another sheet. It was a formal, technical evaluation with a stamp from a Sydney music school. Fernanda read the name of the evaluator, a name she didn't know, but which Arnaldo clearly did. This man was one of Australia's greatest specialists in musical talent in the 90s, Arnaldo explained. Your father sent a recording of you to him, without telling you, just to get an external opinion. The evaluation says you had international-level potential. Fernanda felt anger rising slowly, mixed with something she couldn't name. It was anger, it was longing, it was the 15 years of silence weighing differently now. Now it wasn't just the weight of someone who lost, it was the weight of someone who was prevented. He never told me any of this, she said. He probably didn't want to pressure you. That was Lauro. She closed her eyes, breathed. When she opened them, there was something different in her expression. The fear hadn't gone away, but the anger had come to stay beside it. I need to play tonight, she said. For real. I know, Arnaldo replied. Give me the violin, she asked. Arnaldo opened the case without hesitation and handed it over. This time, no ceremony, no instruction, no warning, just handed it over. Fernanda positioned her elbow, chin, fingers on the strings and played, not a note, an entire phrase, long, clean, with 1 or 2 imperfections that were normal after 15 years, but with a musicality that isn't learned, that is either born or not born. Arnaldo remained quiet until she finished. It's here, he said simply. It never left. She lowered the instrument. Her hands trembled a little, not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in a very long time. You need a few more minutes to warm up your fingers, Arnaldo said, already turning to the door. I'm going to talk to Dr. Henry, the owner of the house. He hired me. He owes me a favor. I'll ask for a spot in the program. Roderick won't allow it. Roderick is a guest, Arnaldo replied without turning. Dr. Henry is the owner. Important difference. He left. Fernanda was alone in the small room, the violin in her hands, and started playing again, slowly, at first, warming up. Her fingers found the places they knew by memory. Her body returned to a posture she had abandoned but never forgotten. 5 minutes. 10. When Arnaldo returned, there was a different lightness on his face. It's done, he said. Doctor. Henry made space after the next piece. You have about 15 minutes. Fernanda nodded. What do I play? What you know by heart. She didn't need to think. Bach, Partita number 2. My father taught it to me when I was 10. I never forgot a single note. Arnaldo smiled for the first time since they had met. Perfect. It's one of the most difficult pieces in the solo violin repertoire. If you play that, I know what happens if I play that. He nodded. Then we're ready. 5 minutes remained when the door to the small room opened without a knock. It was Patricia. She stood in the doorway, looking first at Fernanda, then at the violin in her hands, then at Arnaldo. It took her a second to put the pieces together. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice already taking on the tone of someone about to tell on them. Arnaldo positioned himself slightly between her and Fernanda. "Nothing that concerns you, my dear. Roderick will want to know about this. Roderick will know at the right time," he said with a calm that was almost threatening. Patricia stood still for 2 seconds, assessing. Then she turned and left, her footsteps quick down the corridor. Arnaldo turned to Fernanda. "She'll talk. I know. That changes the time we have." Fernanda raised the violin, positioned it for the last time, and looked at the door. "So, it's now or never." Arnaldo closed the door to the small room and turned the lock. "How much time do you need?" he asked. "I'm ready." "That's not what I asked," Fernanda breathed. "2 more minutes, just to warm up my left hand." He nodded and stood guard near the door, while she played softly, almost silently, the most difficult passages of the partita. Her fingers gradually detached from nervousness. Her left hand warmed up. Her posture returned. Arnaldo spoke without turning. "Dr. Henry is a fair man. When I explained who you were, who your father was, he didn't hesitate. Said the program was his, not Roderick's. Roderick is the most important guest of the night." "Was," Arnaldo corrected, "before I told Dr. Henry that he humiliated an event employee in front of 40 people while someone filmed it." Fernanda stopped playing. "You told him that?" "Doctor Henry has a company, a reputation. He doesn't want to appear in an internet video associated with that kind of thing." A pause. He was furious. "Not with you, by the way." She processed this, and the spot in the program? Confirmed. After the next piece, Dr. Henry will go to the microphone and announce a special surprise. No name, no details. You go in when he waves. "And the violin?" Arnaldo turned to her with an expression that was almost amused. "Dr. Henry said the Stradivarius is a decorative piece, and that any musician invited by the conductor responsible for the night has authorization to play it." He crossed his arms. "I am the conductor responsible for the night." Fernanda looked at him for a second. "Why are you doing this?" he thought before answering. "Because I've spent my whole life owing your father a favor I never had a chance to repay." He uncrossed his arms. "Today, I pay." She said nothing. There was nothing to say. Outside, the music returned. The next piece had begun. They had only a few minutes. Arnaldo opened the door a crack and checked. The corridor was clear. They left. They reached the side entrance to the hall without encountering anyone. Arnaldo went first. She followed, the violin clutched in her arm. Through the crack in the door, she could see the entire hall. Guests seated, the quartet playing in the background. Dr. Henry standing near the fireplace talking to 2 men, and Roderick in the center of his usual circle, his back to the door, gesticulating as he spoke. Fernanda watched for a moment. He didn't know. He was still laughing, still in control, still the master of the night. Soon, he wouldn't be. That's when Arnaldo's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. His expression changed. "What?" Fernanda asked softly. "Dr. Henry." He turned the phone for her to see the message. "Roderick found out something. He's asking to end the event early. Come talk to me now." Fernanda closed her eyes for half a second. Patricia had been faster than they imagined. "Is it all falling apart?" she said. "Not yet." Arnaldo was already typing a response. "Dr. Henry won't end anything without talking to me first. He hired me. The contract specifies a full performance until midnight, and he's a man of his word. But if Roderick pressures him..." Fernanda, he spoke her name for the first time, firm and direct. "Dr. Henry is 62 years old, built his company from scratch, and doesn't let anyone pressure him in his own home. I know this because I've worked for him 3 times. He put the phone away. "Trust me." 30 seconds of silence. The phone vibrated again. Arnaldo read it, gave a half smile. "He's going to the microphone now," he said, pushing the hall door open slightly. "Go in when I wave." Inside, the quartet stopped. Dr. Henry walked to the center of the room with a microphone in hand. Roderick turned his head, confused. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue the evening..." Dr. Henry's voice was deep, paused, with the weight of someone accustomed to being heard. "I would like to present a surprise that Conductor Arnaldo has specially prepared for you." Roderick took a step towards Dr. Henry, opened his mouth. Arnaldo entered the hall, walked to the center, without looking at anyone, and waved. Fernanda pushed the door. She entered. Roderick moved before anyone else, took 2 steps forward, and stood in Fernanda's way. with the naturalness of someone accustomed to the world stopping for him. "Henry," he said, the smile still on his face, but his voice strained. "With all due respect, what is this? It's a musical performance. Roderick, this woman is an event employee." He spread his arms to the room, calling for witnesses again, as he had done before. "She was hired to clean, not to perform. And she already tried to play today, and she failed. And I politely asked her to stop." "Politely," Arnaldo repeated in a low voice beside Fernanda. Roderick heard him, turned. "Does the conductor have something to say?" "I do," Arnaldo replied without raising his tone. "But after the young lady plays first, I will not allow it." Roderick's voice rose a notch. Not much. Just enough to show that control was costing him some effort. "Now, this is a private event, in a private space, with an instrument that is mine, and I have every right to— The instrument is in my possession, authorized by the owner of the house." Arnaldo interrupted. "You are a guest. A guest owns nothing here." The room fell silent. Roderick looked at Dr. Henry. Dr. Henry didn't avert his gaze, didn't help, didn't back down. He stayed exactly where he was, microphone in hand, waiting. "All right then," Roderick said, taking a step back, composing his smile. That smile. "All right, let's see." He turned to the room and spread his arms like someone accepting a wager. "After all, I made the challenge myself, didn't I? If she plays, I'll marry her." My words. Everyone here heard it. A calculated pause. "But we know it won't come to that." A few people chuckled. Some were still on his side. Patricia, in the corner, crossed her arms with a satisfied smile. "You can play," he said with the false generosity of someone granting a favor. "I'm very keen to see this." He returned to his place, picked up his whiskey glass from the side table, and waited, comfortable, secure, with the posture of a man who had never lost anything in life and didn't expect to start now. Fernanda raised the violin. The room was completely quiet. She positioned the bow, took one deep, slow breath, closed her eyes for half a second, not from fear, but from concentration, and began. "Bach, partita 9, 2, chaconne." The first phrase came out clean, precise, with an emotional weight that couldn't be rehearsed. It came from muscle, from memory, from somewhere deeper that 15 years of silence hadn't managed to reach. 3 seconds. A middle-aged woman in the second row straightened in her chair. 5 seconds. The man in the burgundy tie stopped checking his phone. 8 seconds. Roderick still had his arms crossed, but the corner of his mouth had stopped smiling. Fernanda played on. Her calloused fingers moved with a precision that was anything but amateurish. The chaconne is one of the most demanding pieces in the solo violin repertoire. 20 minutes of music, written to expose every limitation of the player. There's no faking it, no hiding. Either you know it, or you don't. She knew it. Roderick uncrossed his arms. It was then that Arnaldo slowly walked to the center of the room, the folder in his hand, and spoke in a volume everyone could hear, but that didn't break the music. "While you listen," he said, "I'd like to show you something." He took the newspaper article from the envelope and handed it to the man closest to him. He looked, then passed it on. "Fernanda Alves," Arnaldo announced. 12 years old, National Classical Music Competition, first place in the state, evaluated by specialists as international-level talent. Roderick took a step forward. "That doesn't prove. I'm not finished," Arnaldo said, without looking at him. He took out the technical evaluation, passed it to Dr. Henry, who read it in silence, and then looked up at Fernanda with a completely different expression than he'd had at the beginning of the night. "This document is from one of Australia's greatest evaluators of musical talent," Arnaldo continued. "Issued when she was 12 years old, after analysis of a recording sent by her father, Professor Lauro Alves, who dedicated 30 years to teaching music to those who couldn't pay." Roderick opened his mouth. "Mop hands," Arnaldo said slowly, clearly, without anger. "That's what you called them. These hands played before they could write their name. These hands were evaluated as exceptional by those who understand, and these hands are playing now." The room slowly turned, not all at once, but it turned. The middle-aged woman in the second row had tears in her eyes. The man in the burgundy tie was standing, without realizing he'd risen. 3 people who had laughed before were now watching in absolute silence. Roderick looked at Patricia. She no longer had her satisfied smile. He looked at the room. The room was no longer on his side, and Fernanda kept playing. The chaconne has a passage in the middle that shifts from minor to major. It's a sudden turn, like light entering through a crack. Those who know the piece understand that moment is the heart of everything. When Fernanda reached this passage, someone in the third row made an involuntary sound. It wasn't applause, It wasn't a word. It was the kind of reaction the body gives when caught by surprise by something beautiful. The white-haired lady who had stopped looking at her phone earlier was now holding her hand to her mouth. The young man who had filmed the humiliation still had his phone raised, but this time it wasn't to mock. He was filming differently, quietly, carefully. Patricia uncrossed her arms, not because she wanted to. Her body uncrossed them on its own. The bald man who had applauded Roderick's jokes was sitting on a chair with his elbows on his knees and his head tilted forward, listening with an attention he probably hadn't used in years. A murmur began at the edge of the room and moved towards the center in waves. It wasn't the murmur from before, of mockery, of easy entertainment. It was a different kind. It was the sound of people realizing something at the same time. One of the men who had been by Roderick's side the whole time turned to him and said softly, unable to hold back, "Mate, she's incredible." Roderick didn't respond. "Doctor." Henry handed the documents to the man next to him and slowly walked closer to the music. He stood, arms relaxed, listening. His expression was that of someone who recognizes when they are in the presence of something real. Fernanda was reaching the final part of the Chacone, the most demanding passages, the ones that separate those who study from those who feel. She felt it. Her fingers flew on the strings with a precision that wasn't mechanical. It was the memory of love. It was old man Lauro in the front row, his wedding and funeral suit, eyes filled with tears. It was the little back room of the local public school smelling of coffee and rosin. It was everything she had kept in a box at the back of the wardrobe for 15 years. All of it coming out now through the wood of a $2 million violin in a mansion that wasn't hers. Roderick took a step back, then another. He was retreating without realizing it, as if the music was occupying the space that was his. The woman in the gold dress, Patricia, turned her face away. She couldn't look at him. Fernanda finished. The last note hung in the air for a second, which seemed longer than it was. Then came silence. 2 seconds of total silence, which is the greatest compliment an audience can give. Then the man in the burgundy tie clapped, once, twice, and stood up. The middle-aged woman rose with him, then the white-haired lady, then the bald man, who this time applauded for real. In 15 seconds, half the room was on its feet. Roderick didn't applaud. He stood still, whiskey glass in hand, with the face of someone who had miscalculated something very important. Dr. Henry walked up to Fernanda and tilted his head slightly. That was extraordinary. She lowered the violin. Her hands still trembled a little. Her chest rose and fell. That's when Roderick moved. He walked to the center of the room, with that confidence that was a conditioned reflex. The smile had returned. Different now, more strained, but still there. "What a performance," he said into the microphone that Dr. Henry was still holding. He took the microphone with a naturalness that wasn't consented to. "Seriously, impressive. The young lady has talent. I acknowledge that. Pause. But let's be honest, shall we? This was a rehearsed number. She came prepared for this. That story about a cleaner who hasn't played in 15 years was a script." He turned to the room. Does anyone really believe that someone stops playing for 15 years and then just comes back like that, out of nowhere, at a party? Some faces faltered. Doubt is a powerful tool. "Arnaldo," he turned to the conductor, "you planned this with her beforehand, didn't you? You knew her. Both of you came prepared to embarrass me in front of my friends. That's what this is." Arnaldo opened his mouth, but another voice responded. It was the young man, the same one who had filmed everything. He had his phone raised again. "I have the video of you taking the violin from her earlier," he said with a calm that didn't match his age. "I have the video of you calling her hands mop hands. And I have the video from now, all 3. He paused. "Already sent it to my channel. It's got 200 views. I posted it about 3 minutes ago." The room went cold. Roderick turned to him. "You didn't have authorization to film. The event is in an unrestricted area, and you are a public figure," the young man replied. "I checked before posting. I'm clean." Dr. Henry slowly extended his hand. "Roderick, the microphone." Roderick looked at the extended hand, looked at the room, looked at Fernanda. She had no expression of victory, no smile, no triumph. She just stood there with the violin in her hand, breathing. He placed the microphone in Dr. Henry's hand. "I think it's best if you go," Dr. Henry said softly. Just him, it wasn't a question. Roderick stood still for 3 seconds that felt much longer. Then he picked up his jacket from the chair, didn't look at anyone, and walked alone towards the exit. The door closed behind him silently. No one called out, no one followed. Patricia looked at the group around her, which had already dispersed, and stood alone by the drinks table, not quite knowing what to do with herself. Fernanda looked at the violin in her hands. She ran her thumb over the wood once slowly and breathed. "Doctor." Henry returned the violin to its support on the wall with both hands, carefully, with the respect of someone who understood what that object had just done. The room had returned to normal, conversations had resumed, waiters had returned, background music had returned, the party continued as if nothing had happened, the way parties do, because other people's lives don't stop. But something in the air had changed. It was difficult to name. It was like when the temperature drops a few degrees, and you can't pinpoint the exact moment. You just know it feels different. Arnaldo came up beside Fernanda, unhurried. "Your father would be proud," he said simply. She didn't reply, not because she didn't want to, but because if she opened her mouth at that moment, she didn't know what would come out. She nodded her head once, slowly. He understood, gave her a light pat on the shoulder, and went to attend to the quartet musicians who were waiting for instructions on the other side of the room. Fernanda stayed for a few more minutes. For no particular reason, she just stayed. She looked at the violin on the stand, looked at the lit chandelier, looked through the tall windows at the night outside, then picked up her coat, put it on calmly, and left through the side door, this time without rushing. 3 weeks later, the video had almost 2 million views. Fernanda knew because the young man, whose name was Ty, had sent her a message on Instagram with the link. The caption he'd put was short: "Cleaner humiliated at Millionaire's party plays violin and silences everyone." Simple as that. And it had exploded. Roderick spent the first week trying to control the damage, issued a statement, then deleted it, disabled comments on his social media, which made everything worse. A business columnist published a piece about the incident. 2 partners from one of his companies requested a meeting. Fernanda learned all of this through others because she wasn't keeping track. She was busy with something else. Arnaldo had called 4 days after the party. He said he'd told the story to a friend who directed a youth orchestra in Brisbane. The friend wanted to chat. It wasn't a promise of anything, just a conversation. The conversation lasted 2 hours. She left with an invitation to participate in an audition process. It wasn't a guarantee, it wasn't a job, it was a chance. The kind she wouldn't have accepted 6 months ago. The kind she would have thanked them for, smiled, and dismissed with some excuse. She accepted without hesitation, called the cleaning company that same afternoon. Her supervisor was surprised, tried to convince her to stay. Fernanda was kind, was grateful, and hung up. She took the box from the back of the wardrobe, opened it. Her father's violin was there, wrapped in the old cloth, exactly as she had left it. She took it out with both hands, slowly unwrapped it, and looked at it for a long time. Then she went to play. The local weekend market near her house was held every Friday morning. Fernanda had a habit of stopping there to buy fruit before work, a habit of years that she hadn't changed yet. One Friday, 2 weeks after accepting the audition process, she was choosing oranges when she heard it. A girl, probably 11 or 12, was playing the violin in a little corner near the entrance, her case open on the ground, a few coins inside. She played with the wrong posture, elbow too low, but with a concentration that made the pose matter little. A man stopped nearby, looked, and said loudly to his wife, "People making noise here. I'm going to talk to security." The girl stopped playing, lowered the instrument, looked at the ground. Fernanda put her bag of oranges down, walked up to the girl, and knelt down to her height. "Elbow higher," she said softly. "Like this. Lift it up." The girl looked at her, confused. "Keep playing," Fernanda said. "Don't stop for anyone." The girl raised her elbow, repositioned the bow, and started again. The sound improved, just a little, but it improved. Fernanda stayed until the music finished. Then she placed a note in the case, picked up her bag of oranges, and left. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. This story stays with me. I keep thinking about what would have happened if Fernanda had left that bathroom, if she had picked up her coat, left through the service door, and left that violin behind one more time. But she didn't. And that tells me something I'm still processing, that there are things inside us that don't die. No matter how heavy life gets, no matter how someone looks down on you and decides you have no worth, the talent, the story, the memory of those who truly loved you, that doesn't stay hidden forever in a box at the back of the wardrobe. At the right time, with the right hands, it comes back. I saw it happen, and that makes me believe there are many Fernandas out there. Someone who stopped halfway because life gave them no choice. Someone who keeps something precious wrapped in an old cloth, waiting for their moment. If you are that person, your moment might be now. If this story moved you in any way, if you felt something inside while listening, please leave a like. It's the simplest way to tell me that these kinds of stories are worth continuing to tell. Tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. Seriously, I read them all and make a point to respond thoughtfully to anyone who takes a moment to comment. And if you believe in the power of stories like this, subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. This channel is just starting, and every new subscription gives me the drive and certainty to continue this journey. I'm counting on your help. Don't go yet. Choose one of the 2 stories I've left on screen for you to watch next. I'll see you in the next video.